The rhythmic sound of a knife hitting the cutting board filled the air, blending with the fragrant aroma of food wafting through the spacious expanse of the Silver Spoon restaurant, one of the most luxurious eateries in the neighborhood. Well-dressed patrons sat comfortably at high-end wooden tables, laughing and chatting merrily. Mason, the restaurant's owner, stood behind the cashier counter in a neatly tailored suit, counting thick stacks of cash with a faint, satisfied smile on his lips. The days of struggle and poverty were now far behind him. Today, he was a successful entrepreneur, admired by all for owning a thriving business. But just then, the glass door of the restaurant creaked open, and an elderly man stepped inside. The man was old, his eyes weary, his tattered clothes worn thin by time. His silver hair was disheveled, and he walked slowly, clutching a battered hat to his chest. His gaze carried a quiet plea. The lively atmosphere of the restaurant fell silent in an instant. A waiter wiping a table paused, sneaking an uneasy glance at the old man. The wealthy patrons halted their conversations, turning to stare at him with thinly veiled disdain. Mason looked up from the counter, his brows furrowing. "Hey, old man, this isn't a place for begging. Get out," he barked, his cold voice cutting through the stillness. The old man flinched but bowed slightly, his raspy voice trembling with age. "I'm not asking for money, just a meal. I'll pay you back when I can." A scoff echoed from a corner of the room. A middle-aged, affluent patron swirled his wine glass, squinting at the old man with a smirk. A soldier from the old days, reduced to this? Broke and begging in a fancy restaurant, how pitiful. Snickers rippled from the nearby table. "Fought your whole life, and you still can't match a faux seller like our boss Mason, huh?" Mason's irritation flared at the comment. With a sharp wave of his hand, he signaled a waiter to escort the man out. "We don't serve people like that here." The waiter hesitated, but under Mason's icy glare, he reluctantly approached the old man. "Sir, I'm sorry, please leave," he murmured, gently nudging him toward the door. The old man didn't resist. He cast one last glance around the restaurant, sighed, and turned to go. But as he reached the door, he paused. Slowly, he turned back, his thoughtful eyes locking onto Mason. "You've grown up so much," he said softly. The room seemed to freeze. Mason blinked, a chill creeping up his spine. Why did those words feel so familiar? The old man smiled, a smile tinged with emotion and deep sorrow. "You're not that little boy anymore." Mason froze, an odd sensation stirring within him, as if he'd heard those words long ago. Shaking his head vigorously, he dismissed the thought. "What are you saying? I don't understand." "Just go." Without another word, the old man turned and shuffled out, his hunched figure disappearing into the bustling street. Ash, a waitress who had witnessed the entire scene, felt an inexplicable unease. She didn't know who the old man was, but his parting words hinted at a deeper story. Glancing at Mason, she noticed his usual confidence had wavered. Though he tried to mask it, his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Unable to sit still, Ash slipped off her apron, bought a boxed meal with her own money, and hurried outside. Under the dim glow of streetlights, she found the old man sitting on a park bench, sipping water from a battered flask. "Sir, are you hungry?" she asked gently, offering him the meal. Surprised but grateful, he accepted it with a warm smile. "Thank you, young lady. This isn't from the restaurant, is it? Did you buy this yourself?" Ash nodded, sitting beside him as he ate slowly. Curiosity gnawed at Ash. "Sir, what you said earlier, it stunned the boss. Do you know him from before?" The old man, whose name was Elisha, paused, lost in thought, then sighed. "Do you believe in fate, child?" "Yes, I met him long ago." Ash leaned in, captivated, as Elisha's low, steady voice unraveled a memory. I was a young soldier once, fighting on the battlefield. During a horrific bombing, an entire village was leveled. Amid the smoke and flames, I heard a faint cry, a boy, about 6, trapped under rubble, his legs injured, clutching a torn piece of cloth. He was screaming, terrified, surrounded by death. Ash shivered. What happened next? I rushed into the debris, Alicia continued, and pulled him out just before the house collapsed completely. He clung to me, trembling, his eyes full of fear. I didn't know his name, but before I had to leave, I tied a military paracord around his wrist. I told him, keep this. If you ever forget me, it'll remind you. Ash's breath caught. The story was too extraordinary, too coincidental. She recalled a faint scar on Mason's leg, one she'd glimpsed once when he rolled up his pant leg. He'd never explained it, and she'd never asked. Now, she was certain, the boy Alicia had saved was Mason. Her heart raced. Sir, what did that paracord look like? Alicia smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with nostalgia. A green military cord, a bit frayed. I tied it myself and told him not to lose it. Ash's mind spun. She'd seen Mason pull a worn cord from a personal box once, though he'd never said where it came from. Do you think that boy might still have it? She asked. Alicia's gaze deepened. If he does, he'll remember everything. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. Nightmares plagued him, a 6-year-old boy crying amid ruins, flames roaring, smoke choking the sky. His legs bled, his body shook, until a strong soldier burst through the chaos, lifting him to safety. You're okay, I'll get you out, the soldier said, his voice hauntingly familiar. Mason jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. Why was he dreaming this now? The vividness felt less like a dream and more like a buried memory. Meanwhile, Ash dug deeper, piecing together Mason's past. She learned from a former colleague that Mason was an orphan, adopted by a merchant family after the war, with no memory of his early years or biological parents. The puzzle was taking shape. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Ash searched the restaurant's storeroom after hours. She remembered Mason kept an old wooden box on a high shelf, rarely touched. After a frantic search, she found it, dusted and forgotten. Trembling, she opened it. Inside lay a frayed green paracord, exactly as Alicia had described. Beneath it was a child-scrawled note, "Uncle, when will you come back for me?" Tears welled in Ash's eyes. Mason hadn't forgotten, he'd buried his past so deep he no longer recognized it. The time had come to awaken those memories. The next day, Mason sat in his office, bleary-eyed from sleeplessness, haunted by his dreams. Ash stormed in, placing the paracord on his desk without a word. Mason stared at it, stunned. "Do you remember who gave this to you?" she asked firmly. His breath quickened as he grasped the cord. Suddenly, memories flooded back, the stench of smoke, the roar of bombs, a terrified boy trapped in rubble. A soldier's voice cut through the chaos, "Hold on to this. It'll remind you of me." Mason gasped, reeling. Could that boy be him? Could the soldier be the old man he'd cast out? Before Mason could process it, the restaurant door swung open. Alicia entered, not as a beggar this time, but with the dignified posture of a seasoned soldier. The room fell silent. He approached Mason, smiling faintly. "You've remembered, haven't you?" His voice matched the one from Mason's memories. Mason's world crumbled. "Uncle, you're him?" Alicia nodded. "I'm the soldier who saved you back then." Tears streamed down Mason's face as shame and regret overwhelmed him. "I didn't mean to," Alicia's eyes softened. "I never wanted repayment. I just hoped you'd never forget." Mason broke down, sobbing, begging forgiveness. Alicia placed a hand on his shoulder. Live better, that's enough. Inspired, Mason transformed. He opened his restaurant to the poor, especially veterans, offering free meals and a program called Warm Meals. Each day, he searched for Alicia, desperate to make amends. One morning, Ash rushed in with news: she'd found Lamb at a homeless aid station. Mason raced there, finding Alicia sitting quietly. Kneeling before him, he pleaded, "I'm so sorry." Alicia smiled. "I knew you'd find me." Mason invited him to live at the restaurant, not as a beggar, but as family. From then on, Alicia became an honored guest, sharing war stories with patrons. Mason cared for him like a father, and the restaurant blossomed with kindness. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Mason said, "I thought my wealth was luck, but now I know I owe you my life." Alicia chuckled. "It's not a debt, just a gift. I'm glad you've learned to cherish it." The story ends with Mason serving a meal to a hesitant elderly man, Alicia watching proudly, a tale of gratitude, redemption, and humanity restored. This emotional and meaningful story of Alicia, the shunned soldier who saved Mason, concludes beautifully. Mason not only atoned for his mistakes but spread compassion to others. It reminds us not to judge too quickly. Every person has a hidden past. Gratitude should never be forgotten, and kindness can transform a life. What are your thoughts? Share them below. If you enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories.